Yes, you heard me right. The retirement package rolling into 2026 isn't built for rest, but designed for you to keep working until your body gives way. Retirement wasn't a reward for decades of hard work. It was a temporary treaty between workers and the system. And nobody told you, but that treaty is expiring. Nobody voted to end it. Nobody announced it in the news. But if you've ever looked at your savings account and felt a quiet panic that you'll be working into your 70s, you're not paranoid. You're just watching the math stop working in real time. In the next 10 minutes, I'm going to show you when this deal was invented, why it only worked for one generation, and why we're quietly reverting back to what humans did for most of history. Work until you can't. Let me take you back to 1881. Otto von Bismarck, the iron-fisted chancellor of Germany, stood before the Reichstag with a problem. Workers were angry, socialism was spreading, and revolution was in the air. His solution? What he called practical Christianity. Bribed the working class with security. In 1889, Germany became the first country in history to create an old-age pension system. Here's the catch. You could retire at 70. Sounds reasonable, right? Except the average German didn't live past 45. Even if you survived childhood, only about 25 to 30% of people who made it to 21 would ever see 70. Bismarck wasn't being generous. He was being strategic. Design a system where most people die before they collect, and it costs you almost nothing. He even admitted it later. My idea was to bribe the working classes to regard the state as a social institution existing for their sake. For most of human history, retirement simply didn't exist. You worked until your body forced the issue. Then you died. If you were lucky, your family took care of you in those final years. If you weren't, there were poorhouses. But the idea of spending a decade or two, not working, living off a government check or company pension, that would have seemed insane to anyone before 1889. The United States copied this model in 1935. Franklin Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act, setting the retirement age at 65. At the time, the average American male lived to about 60, the average woman about 64. But here's what matters more. Even for people who made it to age 21, only about 53% of men and 63% of women would ever reach 65 to collect benefits. The system was never designed as a safety net for everyone. It was designed as a payout for survivors. And because most people didn't survive long enough, the math worked beautifully. But here's where the treaty starts cracking. And in just a moment, I'll show you the exact moment it breaks completely. Because it breaks for the same reason every single time. The math flips. The 1950s through the 1980s were the golden age. This was the era your grandparents lived through. The era they tell stories about. Work for 40 years at one company, collect a pension, get your social security check, and live comfortably for maybe 8 to 10 years before you die. That was the deal. In 1950, there were 16 workers paying into Social Security for every one person collecting benefits. 16 workers supporting one retiree. The system was a money printing machine. Companies offered pensions, unions were strong, and retirement felt like a birthright. By 1960, that ratio dropped to 5 workers per retiree. Still sustainable. By 1975, it was 3.2 workers per retiree. Starting to strain, but it held. Then something happened that nobody planned for. We stopped dying on schedule. When Bismarck designed his system, people died at 40. When Roosevelt designed Social Security, people died in their early 60s. The entire architecture of retirement was built on one assumption: you won't be around long enough to collect for very long. But life expectancy kept climbing. Medical advances, better nutrition, safer working conditions. Suddenly, people who retired at 65 were living to 80, then 85, then 90. Retirement duration doubled. In 1950, the average retirement lasted 8 to 10 years. Today, it lasts 18 to 20 years. By 2050, it could last 25 to 30 years. And here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. The system was never designed for this. Retirement age has increased by just 2 years since 1935, from 65 to 67 for people born after 1960, but life expectancy has increased by 16 to 18 years. You didn't get richer, you got older, and the system didn't update. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. Imagine you're planning to retire today, with the median retirement savings for American households approaching retirement, $147. Half of all households in this age group have less than this. The recommended amount? Somewhere between $500,000 to $1 million, depending on who you ask. Do the math. If you're spending $46,000 a year, which is the median for retirees age 65 and older, that $147,000 lasts about 3 years. Then what? 57% of American workers say their retirement savings are behind where they should be. 27% of Americans over 55 have nothing saved at all. Nothing. Not a dollar. The average Social Security check is about $1,900 a month. Try living on that. And remember, that system is running on fumes. By 2033, the Social Security Trust Fund is projected to be depleted. When that happens, benefits automatically get cut to about 79% of what they are now, without congressional action. That's a 21% cut. For someone getting $2,000 a month, that's a loss of more than $400 every single month for the rest of their life. And nobody's fixing it, because every solution is political suicide. Raise the retirement age? AARP has 38 million members who will vote you out. Cut benefits? Same result. Raise taxes? Good luck. So here we are. The treaty promised you could work for 40 years and rest for 10. But you're going to rest for 25, and the system can't afford it. This is the math betrayal. The deal assumed you'd work for decades and collect for a decade. But retirement duration doubled, life expectancy exploded, and nobody adjusted the formula. You're not failing at retirement. Retirement is failing you. What do you think happens next when a system is designed for people to die at 75, but they're living to 90? Drop a comment with your prediction, because we're about to see how corporations answered that question. The second half of the break happened quietly. While you were distracted by longer lifespans, someone moved the risk. In 1980, 38% of private sector workers had a traditional pension, a defined benefit plan. That means your employer guaranteed you a specific amount of money every month for the rest of your life, after you retired. You worked, they promised, you collected, the company took the risk. Then something called a 401k appeared. It started as a tax loophole in 1978, buried in the IRS code. A benefits consultant named Ted Bennett noticed it and thought, what if we let workers defer some income, tax-free, and let it grow? By 1981, the first 401k plans were offered. By the mid-1980s, corporations realized they'd found gold. Why guarantee pensions when you could let workers manage their own retirement and call it empowerment? A pension is a promise. A 401k is a bet. By 2008, only 20% of private sector workers had pensions. Today, it's about 15%. In one generation, the entire system flipped. Employers used to say, work here for 30 years and we'll take care of you. Now they say, here's a retirement account. Good luck. General Motors froze pensions in 2012. IBM did the same in 2006, affecting over 130,000 employees. Verizon, General Electric, Lockheed Martin, they all followed. The message was clear, you're on your own. And when the 2008 financial crisis hit, those 401k accounts lost 25 to 30% of their value overnight. $2.7 trillion in retirement savings evaporated. People who were planning to retire in 2009 watched their accounts collapse. Some never recovered. Here's the invisible change nobody talks about. Retirement didn't disappear. It only got privatized. It stopped being a promise and became a personal performance test. And if you didn't perform well enough, if you didn't save enough, invest wisely enough, time the market correctly, that's your fault, not the system's. But the system was designed to fail you. Because when you shift risk from corporations to individuals, and those individuals are living paycheck to paycheck, working jobs that don't offer pensions, dealing with wage stagnation and rising costs, what do you think happens? They don't save. They can't save. 61% of millennials have nothing saved for retirement. And they're not being irresponsible. They're being realistic. Has your generation been told you'll never retire? Drop your age range in the comments. 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Because this looks different depending on when you were born. We're not entering a new future. We're returning to an old pattern. Right now, 19% of Americans over 65 are still working. That's the highest rate since 1962. Nearly 11 million people over 65 are in the workforce. And the fastest growing age group in the American workforce? People over 75. Let me say that again. The fastest growing segment of workers in America are people over 75 years old. This isn't people working because they love their jobs. 40% of retirees worry they'll outlive their savings. 20% say they've already run short. When researchers ask near retirees, people aged 55 to 64, what their plans are, 62% say they expect to work past 65. 30% plan to work as long as possible. That's not a retirement plan, that's the absence of one. And here's the brutal split that defines everything. If you have a body-based job, construction, nursing, retail, warehouse work, aging becomes a deadline. Your back gives out, your knees fail, you can't stand for 8-hour shifts anymore, you're done. And if you don't have savings, you're in poverty. If you have a knowledge-based job, consulting, advising, teaching, writing, aging can become a business model. You transition to part-time work, advisory roles, flexible hours. You keep working because you can, and because you have to, but at least it's possible. The system is drifting toward a new normal. Retirement isn't rest. It's not leisure. It's part-time work plus partial benefits until you physically can't anymore. Welcome back to 1850. You just have a smartphone now. So what do you do with this? If the old promise is fading, you stop planning for a 40-year career and start planning for 50, maybe longer. The timeline looks different now. From 25 to 35, you're stacking skills. Not just learning a job, but building portable expertise that can travel with you across industries and decades. Credentials that don't expire when your company does. 35 to 50 is your peak earning window. This is when you have leverage, when you negotiate, when you save aggressively, because this is the phase that has to carry the rest of your life. 50 to 65, you're transitioning. Finding work that's less physical, more sustainable, advisory roles, consulting, part-time arrangements, building the income model that can stretch into your 70s. 65 to 75 becomes what retirement used to be. Not full stop, but flexible. A mix of part-time work, Social Security if it's still there, and maybe some savings if you manage to accumulate them. And after 75, you work if you can, not because you want to, but because the math requires it. The treaty didn't end because you failed. It's ending because the conditions that made it possible are gone. You ask, what are these conditions? Shorter lifespans, higher birth rates, strong unions, corporate loyalty, predictable markets, all of it has disappeared. You're living in the gap between what was promised and what's actually possible. And you're not alone. Millions of people are watching the same math break in real time. So here's my question for you, and I actually want to know what you think. Do you believe retirement comes back, or are we permanently returning to work until you can't? Drop your answer in the comments, along with your age range, because I want to see if the answer changes by generation. Retirement was a 70-year experiment. It worked briefly for one generation, under conditions we no longer have. And now the treaty is being rewritten without your signature. The question isn't whether you'll retire, it is how long you'll work before you're forced to stop. And speaking of being forced, if you think the retirement situation is broken, wait until you see what companies are doing with job postings. I just released a video breaking down why companies post jobs they never intend to fill, and how ghost jobs are making it impossible to know if you're even applying to something real. The link is in the description, and trust me, once you see the numbers, you will never look at job boards the same way again.